Your salary is the least important number in your retirement plan. That sounds wrong, so let me prove it. Someone earning $50,000 a year can reach retirement with roughly $345,000 more than someone earning $150,000 and still need a far smaller pile of money to feel wealthy. I ran every figure against current 2026 tax brackets and contribution limits. By the end of this, you will know exactly which number on your paycheck actually decides how your retirement turns out. The number I am talking about is your savings rate. It is the share of your take-home pay that never gets spent, and it is the least glamorous figure in personal finance. It is also the single most predictive thing anyone can know about your financial future, outranking your income, your timing, and your ability to pick investments by an enormous margin. Here is why it carries so much weight. Every other number in your plan touches one side of the equation. A raise adds to what you can contribute. A strong market year adds to what your contributions become. Your savings rate is unusual because it moves both sides at once. Save a larger share, and you feed more money into the machine. Save a larger share, and you simultaneously shrink the amount of money that machine has to produce for the rest of your life, because you have proven you can live on less. That second effect is invisible on a statement. It never appears in a quarterly report, and it quietly does about half the work. So let me build two real budgets in front of you using the rules that actually apply this year. Start with Rochelle. She earns $50,000 a year, files as a single taxpayer, and saves 20% of her gross income, which comes to $10,000 annually, or roughly $833 a month. She puts that into a 401k, so it comes out before federal income tax touches it. Run her numbers. Her gross is $50,000. Subtract the $10,000 she defers, then subtract the 2026 standard deduction of $16,100. That leaves taxable income of $23,900. Under this year's brackets, the first $12,400 is taxed at 10%, and the remainder falls in the 12% bracket. Her federal income tax comes to $2,620. Payroll taxes for Social Security and Medicare take another 7.65% of her full gross, which is $3,825. Add it up, and Rochelle lives on about $33,500 a year. That is roughly $2,800 a month for housing, food, transportation, insurance, and everything else. Nobody would call that luxurious, though it describes the ordinary reality of millions of American households. Hold that number in your head, because it turns out to be the most important figure in her entire plan. Now meet Malik. He earns $150,000, files single, and saves 5%, which is $7,500 a year. On paper, he looks like a person who has arrived. In practice, 5% is close to the automatic enrollment default at a lot of employers, and defaults have a way of becoming permanent. His math runs like this. Gross of $150,000 minus the $7,500 he defers, minus the same $16,100 standard deduction, leaves taxable income of $126,400. That climbs through the 10, 12, and 22% brackets and lands partly in the 24% bracket, producing a federal income tax bill of about $22,934. Payroll taxes on his full gross come to $11,475. What is left for Malik to live on is about $108,000 a year, or roughly $9,000 a month. He is spending more than 3 times what Rochelle spends. And every dollar of that spending is doing something to his future that he almost certainly has not calculated. Let us run both of them forward 35 years. I am using 7% as the long-run annual return, which is a standard, conservative assumption for a diversified stock portfolio measured in today's dollars. Neither one of them gets a raise, neither one gets an inheritance, and neither one picks a single clever investment. Rochelle contributes $10,000 a year for 35 years. Her balance at the end is $1,382,000. Malik contributes $7,500 a year for the same 35 years. His balance is $1,037,000. The woman earning a third of his salary finishes with $345,000 more than he does. That is the headline, and if the video stopped here, it would already be worth your time. But the balance is only half the story, and honestly, it is the less interesting half, because a retirement portfolio does not exist to be large. It exists to replace your paycheck. So the real question is never how much you accumulated, it is how much you needed. The standard tool for answering that is the 4% rule, drawn from decades of research on sustainable withdrawals. The shorthand version says a portfolio can support annual withdrawals of about 4% of its starting value with a strong probability of lasting 30 years or more. Flip that around and you get a target. Multiply your annual spending by 25, and that is roughly the portfolio you need. Apply it to Rochelle. She lives on about $33,500. 25 times, that is $839,000. She arrived with $1.38 million, which is 165% of what she needed. She could have retired years early, or she can now draw about $55,000 a year, which is substantially more than she was living on while she worked. Apply it to Malik. He lives on about $108,000. 25 times, that is $2,700,000. He arrived with $1,037,000, which is 38% of what he needed. His portfolio supports a withdrawal of roughly $41,000 a year against a lifestyle that costs $108,000. He is short by about $1.67 million. After a 35-year career at a salary that put him near the top of the American income distribution. Sit with what actually happened there, because it is not a story about a lazy high earner. Malik did nothing unusual. He contributed to his 401k every single year without fail. There was no early withdrawal, no panic selling in a downturn, no lottery ticket disguised as a stock. What he did instead was spend whatever arrived, save the default his employer had chosen for him, and allow his lifestyle to expand at exactly the same rate as his income. That expansion is the mechanism. Every dollar he added to his monthly lifestyle did two things at once. It removed a dollar that could have been invested, and it added $25 to the finish line he would eventually have to reach. The finish line moved away from him faster than he could run toward it, and it moved silently, because nothing about upgrading a car or a neighborhood or a grocery habit announces itself as a retirement decision. Number 1, your savings rate is the only lever that pushes on both sides of the equation. Test it. Take Malik's exact $150,000 salary and change nothing except his savings rate. Move him from 5% to 20%, meaning $30,000 a year instead of $7,500. His spending drops to about $91,000, his target falls to roughly $2.27 million, and his portfolio after 35 years reaches $4.15 million. He goes from 38% of his number to 182% of it. Identical job, identical salary, identical market conditions. The only variable that moved was the fraction he kept, and moving it swung his outcome by well over $3 million. That is the entire thesis of this video, demonstrated inside a single income. Number 2, lifestyle inflation gets charged to you twice, and almost nobody counts the second charge. Suppose your monthly spending rises by $1,000. Maybe it is a bigger mortgage, maybe 2 car payments instead of 1, maybe the accumulated weight of a dozen small upgrades that individually felt reasonable. That is $12,000 a year. The first charge is obvious. $12,000 a year invested at 7% for 30 years would have grown to about $1.13 million. You gave that up. The second charge is the one that hides. $12,000 of permanent annual spending raises your retirement target by $300,000 because you now need 25 times more. Combined, a single $1,000 monthly lifestyle upgrade moves your position by roughly $1.43 million over 30 years. What makes this so difficult to see from the inside is that lifestyle upgrades stop feeling like upgrades within a few months. Psychologists have studied this for decades under the heading of hedonic adaptation, and the finding is remarkably consistent. A larger home, a newer vehicle, a better neighborhood all deliver a genuine lift in satisfaction that then fades back toward wherever you started, usually within a year. The satisfaction is temporary. The payment is permanent. That asymmetry is what turns a good income into a treadmill. Consider something smaller and more familiar. The difference between a $750 car payment and a $300 one is $450 a month. Invested at 7% over 30 years, that gap becomes $510,000. The vehicle itself barely matters here. What does the damage is the permanence, because cars get replaced on a cycle and the obligation quietly regenerates for decades. This is also where I want to answer the question I know is forming, which is whether any of this still works if you are starting late. Consider Beatriz. She reached 40 with almost nothing saved, which describes a great many capable, hardworking people and carries no shame whatsoever. Her income is $75,000 and she decides to save 20% of it, meaning $15,000 a year for the 25 years between 40 and 65. At 7%, she arrives with about $949,000. More importantly, the act of living on 20% less permanently lowered her finish line. At the same time, it raised her balance. She spent 25 years proving she could live on a smaller number. So the smaller number is what her portfolio now has to replace. A late start with a high savings rate routinely beats an early start with a low one, and that fact rescues more retirements than any investment strategy I could name. Number 3, the national data says this is happening at scale, and it says exactly who it is happening to. Vanguard's How America Saves report for 2026 covers roughly 4.6 million retirement accounts through the end of 2025. The average balance hit a record of $167,970. That headline sounds encouraging until you look at the median, which is the balance of the person standing exactly in the middle. That figure is $44,115. Run the median through a 4% withdrawal, and you get $147 a month. That gap between the average and the median exists because a small group of very large balances drags the average upward while the typical saver stays exactly where they were. Behavior data from the same report is sharper still. Participants deferred an average of 7.6% of income in 2025 with a median of 6.6%. Only 14% contributed the maximum. Among workers earning $150,000 or more, 51% maxed out, which sounds impressive until you read it the other way. Roughly half of the highest earners in the dataset did not. Meanwhile, the Bureau of Economic Analysis put the national personal saving rate at 3% in May of 2026. 3 cents on every dollar of disposable income. against a long-run historical average closer to 8.4%. Number 4. Social Security quietly tilts the field toward the modest spender, and this is one of the most underappreciated facts in American retirement planning. The benefit formula is progressive by design. It replaces a much larger share of a lower earner's income than a higher earner's because the formula applies generous credit to the first slice of your lifetime earnings and much thinner credit to the top slices. There is also a hard cap. In 2026, Social Security taxes apply only to the first $4,500 of wages. So earnings above that build no additional benefit at all. Benefits rose 2.8% this year through the cost of living adjustment, bringing the average retired worker's monthly check to about $2,071, which is roughly $24,800 a year. Full retirement age has now completed its long phase in and sits at 67 for anyone born in 1960 or later. Now watch what that annual benefit does to our two people. Against Rochelle's $33,500 lifestyle, Social Security covers about 74% of her spending before her portfolio contributes a single dollar. Against Malik's $108,000 lifestyle, the same check covers about 23%. The modest spender gets a large, inflation-adjusted, government-backed pension that happens to cover most of her costs. The high spender gets a rounding error. Nobody plans around this, and it may be the largest hidden subsidy in the entire system. If the math so far has changed how you look at your own paycheck, subscribe and stick around, because the next stretch is the practical part, covering the exact accounts, the current limits, and the order to use them. Number 5. If you want to raise your savings rate this year, the account order matters, and the 2026 numbers are as follows. Start with your workplace plan up to the full employer match, because that is an immediate return no market can promise. The 401k, 403b, and governmental 457b elective deferral limit rose to $24,500 this year. If you are 50 or older, the catch-up is $8,000 on top. Workers who turn 60, 61, 62, or 63 during the year get an enhanced catch-up of $11,250, bringing their ceiling to $35,750. One new rule matters if you are a high earner. Starting this year, if your prior year wages with that employer exceeded $150,000. Your catch-up contributions must go in as Roth money rather than pre-tax. Next, if you have a high deductible health plan, look hard at the health savings account. Limits for 2026 are $4,400 for self-only coverage and $8,750 for family coverage, with an extra $1,000 available from age 55. It is the only account in the American system that is deductible going in, tax-free while it grows, and tax-free coming out for qualified medical costs. Then the IRA. The contribution limit rose to $7,500 this year, with a catch-up of $1,100 from age 50. And for money you cannot afford to have in the market, meaning your emergency reserve. The rate you accept genuinely matters. The Federal Reserve has held its target range at 3.5 to 3.75% through the first half of this year, and competitive online savings accounts have been paying in the neighborhood of 4%. The national average across all savings accounts is 0.38%. On a $15,000 emergency fund held for 5 years, 4% produces about $3,250 of interest. The national average produces about $287. Identical money, identical risk, one decision. Number 6. Do not leave the employer match sitting on the table because its lifetime value is far larger than it looks. A 4% match on a $50,000 salary is $2,000 a year. Over 35 years at 7%, that alone compounds to about $276,000. On a $150,000 salary, a 3% match is $4,500 annually, which becomes roughly $622,000 across the same period. Contributing below your match threshold is a voluntary pay cut that you also pay interest on for the rest of your career. Number 7. Delay is expensive in a way that is easy to underestimate because the years you lose are the most valuable ones. Rochelle contributing for 35 years ends at $1.38 million. The identical plan started 1 year later ends at $1.28 million. That single year of hesitation costs her nearly $100,000. The reason surprises almost everyone. A missing year gets subtracted from the end of the run rather than the start, which means you lose the year when the balance was largest and a full cycle of growth was worth the most it would ever be worth. Number 8. There is a place where a high income wins decisively, and it deserves an honest hearing. A large salary makes a high savings rate dramatically easier to reach. Rochelle saving 20% lives on $33,500, which requires real discipline in most American cities. Malik saving 20% still lives on $91,000, which is a comfortable life by almost any standard. Underused capacity is what quietly damaged him, and a large salary is simply what made that unused capacity so enormous. That is the whole reframe. Income determines how large your savings rate can be without pain. The savings rate determines your outcome. Someone who earns a great deal and keeps a great deal is unbeatable. Someone who earns a great deal and keeps almost nothing is simply operating an expensive treadmill, and the data suggests a lot of people are on it. Goldman Sachs research found roughly a quarter of workers earning above $100,000 describe themselves as living paycheck to paycheck, a figure that rises above 40% in the $300,000 to $500,000 range. Number 9. Watch the withdrawal data, because it reveals what the balance data conceals. 6% of Vanguard participants took a hardship withdrawal from their retirement account in 2025, the sixth consecutive annual increase and roughly triple the rate before the pandemic. The median withdrawal was $1,900. That figure is important precisely because it is small. Nobody dismantles their retirement plan for $1,900 unless there is genuinely no alternative available, which tells you how thin the cash buffer has become in a great many households, including plenty that would not describe themselves as struggling. Number 10. Raising your savings rate works far better through fixed costs than through daily willpower. Housing, vehicles, insurance, and recurring subscriptions form the skeleton of your spending. They are decided rarely, they persist for years, and they do not require any ongoing self-control once they are set. A choice you make once and never revisit will outperform 1,000 small acts of restraint, because restraint depletes and structure does not. Run a fixed cost audit once, and you will usually find more room than a year of daily restraint could ever produce. Pull the last 3 months of statements and list every charge that repeats automatically. Insurance premiums almost always fall when you shop them, and a single afternoon of quotes on auto and home coverage routinely moves a household by $50 to $200 a month. Subscriptions accumulate invisibly, and canceling the ones you would not resubscribe to today costs you nothing you would notice. Phone and internet plans reprice constantly, and the retention department has authority the sales page does not advertise. Refinancing or recasting expensive debt changes the payment permanently rather than temporarily. Each of those decisions takes an hour at most and then keeps paying for years without any further effort from you. That is the difference between structural saving and willpower saving, and it is why the households that quietly succeed rarely describe themselves as disciplined. So the practical sequence looks like this. Calculate your actual savings rate right now, meaning everything you save and invest divided by your take-home pay. Whatever the number is, it is the honest starting point. Then raise it by 1 percentage point and hold there until it feels ordinary, which usually takes about 2 months. Then raise it again. Direct every raise, bonus, and windfall to the savings side before it can attach itself to your monthly lifestyle, because a dollar you never see is a dollar you never miss. And automate the whole thing so that the decision happens once rather than 12 times a year. Here is what those percentages actually buy you in time. Assuming you invest the difference at 7% and define the finish line as 25 times your spending. Saving 10% of your take-home pay puts you about 42 years from financial independence. 15% brings it to 36 years. 20% brings it to 31 years. 25% brings it to 28 years. 30% brings it to 25 years, and 40% brings it down to 20. Notice the shape of that. Each additional slice you save buys back more time than the slice before it, because you are simultaneously accelerating the accumulation and lowering the target. That compounding of both effects is why savings rate beats every other variable, and why two people with identical incomes can finish decades apart. I want to be honest about the limits of this argument because it does not apply universally. If you are earning $25,000 a year in an expensive metro area, your problem is genuinely income, and no amount of budgeting will produce a 20% savings rate from a paycheck that does not cover rent. For that situation, the highest return activity available to you is raising your income through skills, credentials, geography, or negotiation. The savings rate argument becomes the dominant force once your income clears your genuine cost of living, and below that line, it simply is not the binding constraint. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. The trap is narrower and more specific than the internet usually suggests. It catches the person whose income cleared that line years ago and whose lifestyle expanded to meet it perfectly every single time, so that the gap between earning and keeping never widened. That person can work for 4 decades at an enviable salary and arrive at 67 with a balance that will not sustain the life they built. So the number that decides your retirement is not printed on your offer letter. It is the fraction of what arrives that you decline to spend, and unlike your salary, it is a number you can change this week without asking anyone's permission. Rochelle is not smarter than Malik, and she is not luckier. She simply built a life that cost less than her income and let the difference compound for 35 years, and the arithmetic did the rest. If this reframed how you think about your own paycheck, the next thing worth your time is my breakdown of the money lessons schools never taught, which covers the foundations underneath everything I just walked through. But before you go anywhere, I want to hear from you, because the comment section on these videos consistently teaches me more than the research does. What is your actual savings rate right now? Not the one you wish you had, the real one. And what did you have to change to get there, or what is currently standing in the way? Tell me the moment you realized your income was not translating into wealth. Tell me if you have watched lifestyle creep happen to you in real time, and what finally made you stop it. If you have already crossed into a savings rate above 20%, tell everyone what it cost you and whether it was worth it, because somebody reading is about to make that decision for themselves, and your experience will matter more to them than anything I said in the last 25 minutes. I read every one of them.